chorus, please join along with us. This is a good old turn-of-the-century gospel song, I'll Fly Away.
Scripture reading, which comes from the book of Luke, chapter 14, verses 7 through 14. When Jesus noticed how the guests sought out the best seats at the table, he told them a parable. When someone invites you to a wedding celebration, don't take your seat in the place of honor. Someone more highly regarded than you could have been invited by your host. The host who invited both of you will come and say to you, "Give your seat to this other person." Embarrassed, you will take your seat in the least important place. Instead, when you receive your invitation, go and sit in the least important place. When your host approaches you, he will say, "Friend, move up here to a better seat." Then you will be honored in the presence of all your fellow guests. All who lift themselves up will be brought low, and those who make themselves low will be lifted up. Then Jesus said to the person who had invited him, "When you host a lunch or dinner, don't invite your friends, your brothers and sisters, your relatives, or rich neighbors. If you do, they will invite you in return. That will be your reward. Instead, when you give a banquet, invite the poor, crippled, lame, and blind, and you will be blessed because they can't repay you. Instead, you will be repaid when the just are resurrected." The word of God for the people of God.
Thank you, God. Do you remember having, or your parents having the talk with you as a kid? And you probably remember which talk that was. Some of us refer to it as the bird telling us about the birds and the bees. And maybe you've had that talk with your children, or maybe even grandchildren. We think of that as being the big talk, right? you sit the kids down or kid down and say, this is kind of how it works. You know, it's even a bigger deal than the Santa Claus discussion that we've had too, right? And this talk is a pretty big deal for us. It's oftentimes the biggest conversation that we have with our kids. Well, one of the things that I have become aware of talking with people of color is that they have a little different talk with their kids. Their talk goes something like this. Okay, now, if you ever get pulled over in a road stop or whatever, here's how you want to talk to the police officer. And if you're asked for license and registration, this is how you need to reach in your glove compartment to get your registration out, just so that everything's cool. And they have other conversations along those lines that, quite honestly, most of us have never had to have. No, that's not to say that we don't want to be, we've been told along the lines to be respectful of everybody, and be respectful of authority, for sure. But for us, for the most part, it's not literally a life and death conversation, is it? You see, some of us have a little bit different privilege than others. I as an old white guy, or getting there for sure, quite honestly, am sitting at the top of the heap. And there's privileges that I've enjoyed that, quite honestly, I've been clueless about all my life. You know, I feel like, everybody's like this, right? I mean, everybody has got the same opportunities as I do. Well, certainly that's not true with male and female. And certainly Joanna has filled me in on that since we've been married. That it's different for women. That there are a lot of struggles that women have that men just don't have. And I try to be aware of these things. Honestly, in my defense, I came up in a little bit different world, and probably a pretty protected world. Working at summer camps and working in the outdoor business, working for the Nantahala Outdoor Center, who had a woman president. And that was part of the reason why I went back to work there. That there really wasn't any economic difference between the two, as we often see outside in the world today, or even inside our churches. I've been privy to, and I imagine that some of you have been privy to similar conversations around a woman pastor coming to a church and a church being excited about it because they can save money by having a woman pastor. Because they don't have to pay her as much. And this is the point where I go, what? What do you mean you don't pay a woman pastor as much as a man pastor? That's just... I have a hard time understanding it. But we have different understandings of the same thing, and we oftentimes have different perceptions and different privileges that we honestly don't even know that we have. And so it's helpful for us to be intentional to look at these things. To be open to, hey, do I have a leg up on this person or not? In many of the ministries that we do in this church with P4C, with Restoration House, with other ways of reaching out into our community and helping people out. Sometimes, even though we may even look the same, we may have different privileges than others that we're helping out. What are their struggles? What are their limitations that they're trying to overcome? Are they an outcast for one reason or another? These are the things that we wrestle with on a day-to-day basis. This is the sort of thing that Jesus, in the story that we heard today, Jesus was trying to get them to recognize what privilege they had and that God's grace was available to all. That we should all share in the goodness and in the blessings of God. You see, sometimes we take the notion of privilege that's underlying and we think it is God's blessings on us. But is that the case? Or does God really want to bless everyone? I think if we pay attention to this story today, that Jesus is telling the religious leaders of his time, guys, you need to open your eyes. You need to pay attention. You need to look around you and see who's around your table. As I was doing research for this message today, I did a little bit of digging and I found out that it was really interesting in Jesus' day when they sat around the table. What they did is whoever the host was, what they would tend to do is they would set the people next to them that they wanted to kind of rub shoulders with. It was a way for them to kind of climb that socioeconomic ladder, right? For them to get a leg up on everybody else. And so what they would do is they would invite other important people in the community to sit right next to them. And in fact, what they would do is usually the first few cups out or glasses or whatever they drink out of had the best wine in them, right? And then those that were next in line, a little bit further away, they got some pretty decent wine, but it wasn't the best. And then further out, even still, you had those that they got the house wine. For the most part, you could call it wine. But it certainly wasn't as good as those that were sitting next to the host. And even further out, they just had water. Right? It wouldn't have surprised me if Jesus hadn't come in there and says, I'll show you guys. I know how this water thing works. I'll turn that into the good stuff. Fix your wagon. But Jesus called them out on it, didn't he? He said, guys, we should all be welcome at the table. We should all be sitting in an important place. And don't be wrangling to get in as close as you can to sit in the important place. But he seemed to indicate again that the first would be last, and the last would be first. That there would be no real privilege, but that everyone would enjoy justice and mercy and grace in God's kingdom. Jesus calls us to live a resurrected life every day. Jesus calls us to stand up for those that are struggling, for those that need healing, for those that just don't quite have it together. Earlier in the story that we didn't read today out loud, but if you go back and look, he healed somebody on the Sabbath again. That's Jesus. And unfortunately, the religious leaders got caught up in the little details of what wasn't important when Jesus was trying to tell them what was important. People, everyone has a seat at the table. That God's grace is available for all. People oftentimes come to us looking for help. People oftentimes come to us needing just a little bit of grace in their lives. Our job as Christians, our job through the Restoration House and through congregations for children and other ways that we reach out into our community, our job is to help give people the tools needed so that they might have grace and experience a little justice in their lives. To give them the tools that they can help themselves out. And so I thank you for being a part of that. Today I think that Jesus wants us to consider some questions that might help us see people in a new light. Where do you see unearned privilege in your world today? Do you have privileges that you benefit from, but maybe you didn't work for? Who or what created and sustains these situations? And how is Jesus calling us to move beyond these, to reach the least of these, so that God's kingdom is available for all? Let us pray. Have mercy on us, O Lord. Have mercy. For all those times we've been blind to injustice, for all those times we have been taken for granted the privilege that is ours by virtue of this place where we find ourselves, this economic wealth that we can claim, and all the other ways, earn and unearned, that advantage us over others. For the times we have chosen to look the other way, or to occupy ourselves with other things, or to rest from the struggle, have mercy on us, O Lord. Have mercy. Grant us the courage, not just to enlarge the table, but to build a new table of generosity and hospitality.